You turned it off?
No, I did. It's recorded, but I don't know where it is, so I asked Joan to do it. And then we talked with the MCAA about what the plans were there, and then we talked to colleges at different Power 5, mid-majors, HBCUs. So now we're going to talk about the juicy stuff and sports betting. So I think Hawaii is the only state left where you're not allowed to gamble.
Utah.
And Utah.
Utah, Hawaii.
But you can't get really.
Oh, South Carolina.
There's gambling.
There's casino game.
There's gambling in 48 states. The only two there isn't some form of gambling, be it lottery or something, are Utah and Hawaii.
So anyway, so I didn't realize this was coming down the pike, but we had our first talk about it last year. And we're very concerned. We started a white paper. And so here we are to learn more about it. And let me have you guys introduce yourselves, because your titles and your descriptions are very long and I don't want to flub it up.
Harry.
Okay, Harry, there we go. Harry is the.
I am, so what am I? I wear multiple hats. I am presently the gambling policy advisor to the Public Health Advocacy Institute at Northeastern University. I am a mental health therapist and internationally certified gambling addiction counselor in private practice in Philadelphia, a group called Ethos. I am a gambling addict in recovery. Next Saturday, 27th, will be the 10-year anniversary of both my last bet and my suicide attempt related to my pathological gambling addiction. I am a former lawyer. My gambling addiction took everything it can take from a human being, including my privilege to practice law. I ended up, within seconds of taking my life, I ended up homeless. That's a story for another. Happy to tell you anything.
You're looking good now.
I'm an open. It's the green animals. If the elephant matches the elephant, you're okay. But when I tell my patients, my favorite patients are the ones who come in and say, you know, I've met with a bunch of you therapists. You're all really interesting, nice enough people, but none of you know anything about gambling. And I let them go on about 5-10 minutes that way, and then I ask them, well, what do you want to talk about first? Yeah, parlays, teasers, reverses. What are the odds of every bet on a craps table? There's very little about gambling that I don't know quite a bit about from really now 4 different perspectives. Because in addition to being a gambling addict in recovery, a former gambler, a therapist, a policy advisor, I'm also finishing up a doctorate at Northeastern University. My doctorate is not in counseling psychology. I went back and got my master's in. My doctorate's in law and public policy, because when I found myself with the privilege to return to private practice as a therapist, something didn't sit right with me. Here I am, it's 2020, 2021, and I'm now having the privilege to treat people and earn a living because people are suffering from the same thing that nearly destroyed me. And make no mistake about it, it's not that it really destroyed me, it destroyed everything in my wake. I hurt countless people who once loved and trusted me. Many of those relationships never to be repaired. It didn't sit well with me. Now I'm treating people and I recognize a systemic problem with, and full disclosure, and I'm going to speak for Mark and Darian, but I'm confident that none of us are opposed to gambling. I'm not opposed to gambling, but I'm vehemently opposed to a system that is designed in such a way that harm has to occur. So I decided to go back and get a doctorate and try and put some research out there and get involved doing what I'm doing here with all of you, which is to talk about this from the policy side. And have a discussion about, hey, some things here just don't sit right. So that's the 4th hat that I am as a doctor, and my doctorate, the doctoral candidate. Along that journey, I had the privilege to meet Mark and now Darian, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Well, thank goodness I didn't try and give that
There
introduction.
you go. It covers a bit.
I'll be much more brief as I only wear one hat. I am a senior legislative assistant to Congressman Paul Tonko. He represents New York's 20th district, which makes up New York's capital region, Albany, Schenectady, Troy area, And I've been with him for around 4 years, working on a whole host of legislative issues. But this one in particular has come to dominate most of my work in a great way. And I work very closely with Harry and Mark in that capacity on forthcoming legislation that we will talk about later.
And I'm Mark Gottlieb. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Health Advocacy Institute at Northeastern University. And I teach at the law school there. I teach public health advocacy and have done a lot of work, particularly around tobacco policy over the years. But about 10 years ago, started to, and my mentor, Professor Richard Daynard, who is here unfortunately, started to really think that this is going to be a growing public health threat. And then the Murphy case happened, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I don't think we envisioned how rapidly it would become one, and how urgent the need for policy adjustments, corrections would be upon us. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here with you today, and I'll let Harry get started with our brief presentation.
I just want to say one thing. You made it sound like Dick Baynard is dead. He's unfortunately not here.
No,
Dick is in Boston doing very well and actively involved in all of this with us.
Yes.
And as you know, we're a group of faculty members, and Cassandra is an attorney who spoke with us this morning, who were interested in the welfare of collegiate athletes.
I knew that.
I know, I told you that, that's all I told you, right? But here we are, and we're very appreciative of you guys coming.
Yeah, and we're very concerned about, these young athletes and young and vulnerable athletes whose brains have not yet completely developed.
And we did learn last year that about 7% of people, especially men between 18 and 35 are addicted to gambling, which I didn't realize. And our students are largely people between 18 and 35. And
Right.
That's an underestimate.
I believe
Right.
that, yeah. Yeah. So anyway,
Or particularly if you consider people who are at high risk and sort of on their way, I think that is a real underestimate.
so it could actually be our colleagues as well as our students.
And we decided to approach this. There's great emphasis in what we're going to go through with you on student athletes, but having the opportunity and the privilege to be around so many faculty members who, by definition, you're around many 18 to 25-year-old men and women, we decided to broaden it a bit to include all students of that age. And Darian's right. The numbers are artificially low. We'll talk about why, but also the perspective may be wrong. We don't want to wait until people meet the diagnostic criteria of addiction. The warmer term is disorder. We're in a prevention. I want to put myself out of business. My practice is on a wait list. I'd rather be out of business because the best form of treatment for a mental health disorder is prevention in the first place, which is what the public health approach we think is all about. Probably going to make you a little sad in the beginning and then move to some more upbeat things. So we'll talk about the idea of a public health lens. If I went around the table right now and asked everyone to talk about what they see here, looks like to me, probably a fall day, maybe somewhere here in the district, young child out enjoying a nice little scooter ride. It's what we all see. If I hit down, Mark, will it expand? Mark?
That, you just hit that, it'll go away. Yeah.
No, I'm
This,
talking
trying to get
about
rid of
the
the-
slide will expand. If I just
the
hit it
slide
down.
extent.
I think hit something. Hit forward.
There we are. However, the public health perspective says, let's pull back here and let's look at all of the attendant circumstances around what we think we know and understand. That's the approach.
Sorry, I'm trying to get out of that. Self-view. Oh, well, am I, sorry.
I think
It's all working well for
Okay,
me.
yeah.
okay.
Good. So organizationally, we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean when we discuss gambling disorder, a little bit more about what the public health approach is versus out in the mainstream vernacular of the responsible gaming model. We'll talk about why, once you've learned those two things, public health reform, particularly for people below the age of 30, is such a vital concern. And when we talk about student athletes at the collegiate level are performing at the highest level possible for them, short of being a professional. Therefore, they have been conditioned for many years, physically and mentally, to be competitive. And if the risk reward system of the brain isn't fully developed till you're 26 years old, the competitive part can become a real danger when you think about what sports betting is all about in 2024. And we'll finish up with talking about some ideas for advocacy, things to go back to your colleges and universities, talk about and think about. So, teeny-weeny history lesson is important to set the scene. Prior to 1980, gambling disorder was not recognized as a mental health condition of any type at all. It existed, but it wasn't recognized as anything. In 1980, primarily due to the work of a psychiatrist at the VA by the name of Robert Custer, Dr. Custer was treating people coming back from Vietnam and seeing over and over and over evidence of problems with gambling. And he lobbied heavily in DSM-3, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, for the mental health community and the medical community to recognize this. And they did in 1980 for the first time. They categorized gambling disorder as an impulse control disorder. There's something wrong with Johnny and Sally. They can't control themselves.
I think many people still regard it as an impulse control disorder.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And that's part of the responsible gaming vernacular. But it was categorized in the same designation as kleptomania. The focus on the individual and what's wrong with them. No focus on the product itself. And just to highlight how DSM, while it is the way clinicians talk to insurance companies and others, it's by no means a Bible, because that same DSM-3 in 1980, in some context, still considered homosexuality a mental illness as well. Well, science moves forward. And by DSM-5 in 2013, medical science catches up and says, we had this one all wrong. Gambling disorder is an addiction on the same level as heroin and opioids and tobacco and alcohol and cocaine. So when DSM-5 is published in 2013, primarily due to research that shows the dopamine effect on the human brain is exactly the same as what you see if someone's struggling with heroin or opioids. I'm not going to show it today, it's a little too long. There's a video of a person in recovery from gambling disorder. Hasn't made a bet in a few years. Put this person in an MRI tube. They install on top of the MRI tube a spinning roulette wheel. They have the individual play video roulette while a brain MRI scan is being done. And the light up on the MRI scan of the brain, not when they win money, but the wheel spinning, the anticipation, the action, is the same as we see people who are struggling heroin and opioids and other chemical addictions. So when DSM-5 is published, we're recategorized now as a full-fledged addiction. First and thus far, only non-substance we categorize as a full-fledged addiction. And I've highlighted for you one of the elements in the diagnostic criteria, the chasing of losses, the chasing of action. And I will tell you one of three things that I share with every new patient when they come in. And it shocks most people at first, but I think as we go forward, it will really morph into a deeper understanding, particularly when we talk about intercollegiate athletes. Gambling disorder has nothing to do with money. Full stop, nothing to do with money. It has about that. It has everything to do with how the product makes the person feel. In fact, for a person struggling with gambling disorder, winning is in some ways worse than losing. Because when you're winning, you might have to stop. But when you are losing, you are chasing more action. It's part of the diagnostic criteria. Analogy I can draw for you is to someone struggling with heroin addiction. The needle and the chemical in the needle are not the problem. The problem is the way that substance makes them feel. There's an expression in treatment. What will an addict do to get their fix? I'll clean it up for this room, whatever it blankety blank takes. That's the way it is with gambling. So what will a person struggling with gambling disorder do to get their hands on their needle? Their needle's the money. They'll do whatever it takes. And that's the cycle. The more you use, the more you need, the more you need, the more you use. I'll blow through these very quickly. I'm happy to share the power.
Ask you something.
Please.
So when you say they're willing to do whatever it takes, they're willing to do whatever it takes, even as a drug addict, to get the money to go and gamble.
I have 13 felonies and 1 misdemeanor to prove it. Gambling disorder, I don't want to go into my whole. I will share anything, with. I'll answer any questions. I'm an open book with everything. I had access to other people's money. My gambling addiction had taken over my mind, my soul, my heart, my conscience. I needed my action. And how do I get my action? I get money. It was never money. It wasn't. I was sentenced to 11 and a half to 23 months in jail in February of 2015. At my sentencing hearing, so all-day hearing, at the hearing, the judge granted me immediate parole in these words. He said, if the court can't look to help someone who stands before it, stuck in the grips of an addiction, admitting their mistakes, asking for help, I don't know why we're here. And the judge ordered me to stay in FIC, which I was already in, but said to me, this doesn't have to be the end. You can do something. And those words saved my life. The comment in the record that His Honor made was, I didn't take anything off the cars, they can't even imagine. They took nothing. I was simply trying to burn out every part of my soul. My underlying mental illness was at such a place. How do you do that? Longer story I'll share another time.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Go through these very quickly. Some of the things you're looking for. Okay. These are the diagnostic criteria. Rather than reading each one of them for you, we're going to share the PowerPoint. You will have them. A couple I want to highlight. One we've already looked at, which is the chasing of the action. The other I want to look at is what we call the bailout. Getting money from someone, going to mom, going to dad, going to friends, looking for ways to fix the financial problem. This is not about a financial problem. What you've gone and done is rearmed yourself. You've solved the crisis so that you can get right back in it. And it's that part that triggers the ongoing problem. All young adults, facts that we know, it's probably worse now because these studies took place before this became a casino. 40% of children below the age of 17 have gambled in the last year. Broaden your thoughts and understanding of gambling. Not talking about, hey, $20, see who can run the fastest across the schoolyard. It can be for a candy bar. It can be for anything of value, predicting tonight's game, or we'll do each other's homework. Anything of value placed at risk. The younger a child is exposed to gambling, the greater the risk of harm, and that goes directly to advertising, the normalization. Both Darian and Mark will talk about that more in a bit. 1 out of every 2 people struggling with gambling will contemplate suicide. 1 out of 5 will make an attempt. As I told you, I am those 1 out of 5. And for children under the age of 25, the risk grows exponentially. Why public health? Each of the things you see on here, from financial difficulties to commission of a crime, to psychological distress, to co-occurring mental health and substance disorders. Virtually all of my patients are drinking too much or are drugging too much. We don't worry about which one's caused the other. It's a chicken or the egg type of thing, but they're all interconnected with each other. And of course, homelessness, family violence, risk of suicide. So what exactly do we mean when we talk about a public health approach? Why are Mark Gottlieb and Dick Danard and I working together on a new way to look at this? You've all heard the words responsible gaming. It's on every commercial that you see. The individual is urged to just behave responsibly. And for younger adults and athletes, oh, wait a minute, my friends can do it. What's wrong with me? I have to figure out what I should be able to do it too. So where does this come from? Showed you earlier that in 1980, gambling disorder gets recognized for the first time as a mental health condition. In that same period of time, 80s into the 90s, the gambling industry knew it wanted to expand. No one had any idea it was going to expand to what we're living with today, but no one wanted to expand because Native American tribes had started to open casinos, first one up in Connecticut. The industry said, wait a minute, we're not going to cede all of this. We want to grow. But they had a new problem on their hands. There's this thing called gambling disorder out in the public square. They need to be able to address this. So the gambling industry commissioned a series of studies that inside the industry are known as the Reno model studies, because the researchers met in Reno to put these studies together. And any of these things I have access, I'll be happy to share with you links to all the various articles that we talk about today. Anytime I give you an opinion, I'll tell it's an opinion. If I'm not prefacing it as an opinion, you can be certain it is double and triple sourced. And again, I'll be happy to share all of that information at any time you ask for it. So the industry hires a group of researchers fully funded by gambling industry money to codify what they're now calling the responsible gaming approach. Responsible gaming model, the Reno model, is not based on any empirical data. Yet they're anecdotal studies. And they're published over a series of about 8 years, 4 studies over 8 years, that can be summarized in the 4 things you see in front of you now. For purposes of presentation today, let's not get into the first one. That's another debate for another time, whether or not the benefit outweighs the cost. I want to focus on the next 3, because these are the 4 prongs of responsible gaming. Second prong being that government and the gambling industry have an obligation to advise people of the known risk. Next, that ultimately each person has to make up their own mind. And lastly, look what a good job we're doing. Less than 1% of people are ever diagnosed, they say. And for those unfortunate few, we will put up money to pay for their treatment. The moral equivalent, I suggest, of big tobacco saying, let us do whatever we want with our product as long as we pay for chemotherapy. We wouldn't tolerate it in that setting. We wouldn't let Budweiser sponsor rehab. But with gambling, it's the responsible gaming model. It's the whole 1-800-GAMBLER system you hear about, where they take a little bit of money from the industry and they provide access to treatment. Why do we know the 1% number is too small? Because we don't look for gambling disorder. We don't screen for it in any form or fashion. You go to your doctor, they will ask you, do you smoke? How much? Do you drink? How often? Which drugs do you take? We do not do any screening for gambling disorder. People get counted when they crawl in for help. There's absolutely no diagnostic screening in advance. Again, no prevention. So how does this relate to intercollegiate athletics and today? 2018, court decides the Murphy case. The Murphy case was not really a case about gambling. The Murphy case, Murphy is Phil Murphy, the current governor of New Jersey, but the original plaintiff in the case was Chris Christie, the then governor of New Jersey. Atlantic City is dying. New Jersey has a problem on its hands. They're down to 3 or 4 buildings, and casinos are gone. Atlantic City is just, it's done. Now, Governor Christie decides sports betting will save Atlantic City. He has a little problem because 20 years earlier, Congress passed the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, PASPA. PASPA was a federal law that said only those states at the time this law is enacted that have sports gambling can keep it. Nobody else can have it. At that time, there were 3, Nevada, and then Delaware and Oregon had a little pool cards, almost like lottery tickets on game in sports gambling. And that was it. PASPA shut down. Governor Christie sues and says, wait a minute, federal government, you have 50 children, not 3. You can't give toys to 3 of your kids and not the other 47. So this was really a 10th Amendment case about states' rights. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her dissent, says, poppycock. This is a gambling case. Call it a gambling case. Now, the general recognition of the case, wait a minute, the court legalized gambling. They didn't. They struck down PASPA, which cleared the way for states to do whatever they want. As we were saying, 2 haven't done anything yet, but 39 others and the District of Columbia have since legalized sports gambling. But in that opinion is maybe the single most important thing to begin discussing. The language I have on the board for you. report says, hey, Congress, you're free to regulate this. But if you don't, states are going to do what they want to do. And think about what Justice Ginsburg said, which is, this is a gambling case. And that's what we've seen. So where has it led? What are Darian and Mark going to talk about? Last year, more than 70 billion with a B was lost. It'll hit 100 billion. They say 2025. I'm not a gambling man anymore, but I was predicting, I would say it's going to hit it this year. And why? Because we're no longer talking about gambling companies. We're talking about what's known as the gambling establishment, a term coined by Professor Jim Orford from the UK. So what do we mean? There are 6 entities that are united as the gambling establishment. And a good moment to point out again, we are not opposed to gambling. We are not prohibitionists. And if I were opposed to gambling, I'd be the biggest hypocrite on the planet. I can't do it. I'm not opposed to it. I'm opposed to what you're going to see in the second half of this presentation. So what is the gambling establishment? The companies, the professional leagues, the teams, the players, and the owners. They all have a cut in this. The NCAA, the conferences, the colleges, and the universities. Media companies, state government itself, and various advocacy organizations. I think we pulled the slide for today's purposes, but the most well-known one is the National Council on Problem Gambling, fully funded by the gambling industry. Well, all of these folks are making money from the gambling industry. Where does that money come from? There are no widgets sold in the marketplace. There are no products introduced into a stream of commerce. The only revenue derived are the public losses. My cup of tea, somebody made the lid, somebody made the warmer. There are no new products. It's the only thing I can think of in our economy where nothing new is introduced. All of the people making all of this money are making it from the public's losses. So think about what that does to this responsible gaming money. It begins to blow it up because to make money, the business model, I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, I'm simply telling you a fact. The business model is get people to engage more often, more quickly with the product. That's the business model. It's in their quarterly reports. I'm not making this up. Only if you take us back very quickly to 2013, it's a known addictive product. Can you identify any other known addictive product where government permits the business model to be, give it to people to use as quickly and as often as possible? As night follows day and day follows night with an addictive product, if you deliver it rapidly, harm is going to occur. And at one time, the NFL knew this because the commissioner in the NFL said, this is going to destroy our game. And the commissioner also said that once the character and integrity of NFL football have been compromised and bonds of loyalty destroyed, NFL will be damaged in ways that cannot be calculated in dollars and cents. Well, funny thing happened on the way to that conclusion. The Murphy case gets decided. So the NFL, and I'm not singling out the NFL, I'm using it as a segue to talk about conferences, colleges, and universities. Every sports league, from NASCAR to tennis to football, all of them do what we're about to show you. The NFL names 7 official gambling partners to the tune, it's reported, about 2.5 billion with a B dollars. That's what the gambling companies are paying for a licensure right in the NFL. But they don't stop there. That's not what sports betting is about. This is your grandparents' sports betting. Are the Eagles going to win or are the Commanders going to win? That's not sports betting anymore. Sports betting is this. In the NFL, we're the first to do it, but again, everyone is doing it. The NFL sells its statistics. They take all of their data. And the NFL buys themselves a big chunk of a company called Genius Sports. It says to all the gambling companies, if you want to create bets using our stats, you have to buy our stats from our partner, Genius. We don't know how much more in the hundreds of millions or billions is spent on this. It's not publicly reported. The NFL is not publicly traded. But if you extrapolate it out over every sport, they are spending billions of dollars to obtain statistics to create gambling opportunities. How do they get the money back? Public losses. So why do I point out with the NFL? Because colleges and universities and conferences are on the verge of doing the same thing, and no one is yet talking about it. Because in 2022, the Mid-Atlantic Athletic Conference, one of the smaller conferences, went to the NCAA and said, listen, we need some clarification. Who owns the stats? Are they yours, or do they belong to the conferences and the member universities and colleges? Because on paper, the NCAA has a prohibition against gambling. The conferences and the universities and colleges are not prohibited. The mothership is universities do whatever they want to do. NCAA says to the Mid-Atlantic Athletic Conference, the stats belong to you, except for tournament time. We're going to hold on to the tournament stats. But your regular season stats, all of your games in every sport, they belong to you. Do whatever you want with them. And what happens immediately? The MAC creates a partnership deal with Genius Sports. It's sitting right there. They have taken hundreds of millions of dollars from Genius Sports to own those statistics. But nobody's acting on it yet. Why? Because this is likely the first of many. Why do I say that? Because the titans are out there. And there are companies like Sports Radar and Genius and Imagery, and about 3 or 4 others, all competing for how much are we going to have to pay to get our hands on the stats. Initially, it was the Power Five. That's what it looked like in 2023. And when the Power Five make a move, it will set, just like the NFL set the market, the Power Five would set the market. But it's gotten a little more sinister than that. This is a map of the Power Five conferences, January 1st, 2020. It almost kind of makes sense, the green being the Pac-12. What I want you to pay the most attention to right now is the light blue, the Big Ten. Great Lakes, everyone knows where the Big Ten is. This is January 1st, 2023. We're now down to Power 4 because the Pac-12 is gone. Why? Now take a look at the light blue Big Ten. The Big Ten now stretches from Rutgers in New Jersey all the way to Oregon and Washington, not because the Pacific Ocean has merged with the Great Lakes, but because this is a map of the most lucrative opportunity for the conferences to sell their debt. Because on a football Sunday, you're going to have games from noon in the East till midnight in the West, all in the Big Ten. And the Big Ten has signed a letter of intent with Genius Sports. If you look now at the conferences, you can see, and Kelly, really the big fish out there is Hawaii, because I will tell you, many a night I tried to get even at 3 o'clock in the morning because the rainbows were playing. This map represents not a reconfiguration of what makes sense for conferences. This was done for negotiations of statistics with the gambling industry to create what's called micro betting, which is what Darian and Mark are going to talk. So I don't mean to upset you. Just want you to know this is what is in fact happening in the world of sports betting. My friend and colleague, Darian Harbeck.
Thank you, Harry. So I'll just start a little background on Congressman Tonko. He has been an elected official pretty much all of his life. He spent around 20 years in the New York State Assembly, where he started his work on mental health and addiction. He helped pass the first mental health parity law in the entire nation. And he started his work really focusing on the opioid epidemic, underage drinking, and the like. And so he got elected to Congress in 2008, started his term in 2009. And since then, he's been a leader on Capitol Hill in this space. He is co-chair of the Addiction Treatment and Recovery Caucus, and continues to push his work in the opioid space on addiction issues. And so back in the fall of 2022, we were getting outreach, and the Congress was being stopped in the district by constituents who were raising alarms about the number of advertisements that they were getting from these sports books since the 2018 legalization. And it seemed to have really spiked after the 2020 pandemic. So he started asking questions. Congressman Tonko is not necessarily the target of many of these advertisements, so he wasn't, seeing them himself. Many of us on staff were also seeing these advertisements really frequently.
You're more of the demographic, probably.
I am
Demographic.
leaning more toward the demographic, yes. And so he started asking questions. He said, hey, this is an addictive product. People are being induced to bet 24/7. And there's no doubt in his mind at this time that children are also being exposed to these promotions and advertisements as they are all over social media, every single platform. In addition to billboards, podcasts, radio, television, and of course during live sporting events. So immediately there is this parallel that he connected to the tobacco industry. And so our first iteration of legislation to tackle this problem from a public health perspective was called the Betting on Our Future Act. And what the congressman did was mirror legislation from the 1960s that effectively outlawed tobacco advertisements. We essentially used the section that outlawed the advertisements word for word and put sports betting and gambling in its place.
You weren't around in the 1960s, but
I was not.
I will
no.
tell you, it was actually 1971 that law passed.
Okay, 1971. It was, thank God for Mark. So this was intended to make a big splash. No one else in Congress is talking about this issue at this point. Back in 2018, after the Murphy case, Senators Schumer and Hatch introduced a piece of legislation that was supposed to be a regulatory framework for the industry, but it really ended up going nowhere. So what you've had since 2018 is this, what the congressman likes to say all the time, is this largely unregulated Wild West environment. And so after introducing the Betting on Our Future Act, naturally we received lots of outreach from stakeholders all across the country and of course in the district. And that's really how I became connected to Mark and Harry was through the introduction of this bill. Since we've been working together, it was clear to the congressman that only addressing the advertising is not going to be enough. So what we have now with the Safe Bet Act, which the congressman introduced as legislative framework back in March, is the first real comprehensive approach to this issue
From a public.
from a public health perspective. That's right. So what we have is setting up a framework that relies on DOJ to enforce minimum federal standards for this product to make it safer, less addictive, while still preserving the freedom for people to bet. So what it does, so we set up this general prohibition on sports betting. States who have legalized mobile sports betting would have to submit an application to DOJ proving that they're meeting these minimum federal standards that we set in the bill. It would have to be reapproved every 3 years just to make sure that they're holding up to those standards. And the bulk of the bill really addresses 3 important points. So the advertising first. We have moved away from a complete prohibition on the advertisements as what we found is, of course, it's not very politically viable at this time. There were a lot of First Amendment concerns, but with the help and from Harry and Mark, what they've told me, and the congressman, is establishing this as a known addictive product really changes the approach here and the ability of Congress to act. So we have basically set up, advertising that would hope to prevent young children and people at risk from being able to view these ads. So, prohibiting sports betting broadcasts between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. And then, of course, a prohibition during live sporting events, and then also regulating the content of these ads. So what I hope Mark will get into and what you'll be able to see is that, the content of these ads is really the bulk of the issue here is where, in terms of the advertising, they are coming out with, bonus, no sweat, risk-free, or odds boosts and all these promotions that induce and keep people betting. And additionally, we prohibit sports betting advertising, like I just said, designed to induce the use of gambling products. On the second piece is affordability. This would prohibit operators from accepting more than 5 deposits from a customer in a 24-hour period, from accepting deposits via credit cards, and requiring the operators to conduct affordability checks. Perry had mentioned that chasing losses is part of the diagnostic criteria for gambling addiction disorder in the DSM-5. And the onus should be on the sports books to step in when they see their customers chasing losses. They have the ability to do this. They already collect the data on each user to know when someone is in trouble. The problem is that right now they are weaponizing that data against their users instead of protecting them.
Darren mentioned very quickly, this is so relevant with student athletes and college students.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many college students I'm treating who don't have any income. They're not working, yet they are losing tens of thousands of dollars of other people's money, of student loan money.
Yep.
If there was an affordability check, this wouldn't happen. It just seems to make sense. The current model puts the onus on the student when you need to behave responsibly. And as you'll see,
Right. So
And, like, using credit cards is a major red flag, right?
major red.
in addition to red flags, public health risk, you're borrowing money at 29%. Even if you win, you can't win. And some of these, the public health perspective, it's dangerous because it has a lot of common sense to it. I just hospitalized a 21-year-old young man who turned 21 in November. I hospitalized him for a suicide attempt in February because he lost over $71,000 between his 21st birthday and his hospitalization. This same individual works 20 hours a week, makes $8.50 an hour. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But it's part of the current model that leaves the onus on the individual rather than regulating the distribution of the product.
And if he or she had access to student loan funds.
Mhm.
they
Oh,
would be
yeah, that'd
gone.
be gone.
So they lost them first.
Okay,
Right.
that
They lost
went
them first.
Then the
Yeah.
credit card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
So again, the sports books, they know this is happening, they have access to this information, and yet they continue to prey on the most vulnerable customers.
Can I ask you something? When you
Yeah.
say pray, so when they pick up on a pattern
Mhm.
from their data analytics, I'm assuming they're doing this. Do they make sure they advertise to that individual even more?
Yep.
Wow,
Yes.
that is.
So I'll tell you, we've had, since the introduction of both of these bills and legislative frameworks, I've gotten cold calls from professional sports bettors who get on the phone and they say, you have no idea how bad it actually is when they know that someone is bad at sports betting.
They go out.
They go after them more. They would tell me that, I am really good at sports betting. They limit the amount of deposits I can make on my account. They shut down my accounts and, prevent me from betting. And I think it's clear to most of the people who are in that space that the targeting is, again, at the most novice rookie bettors.
This is free money.
Do you know what an online is? And that's what my
Yeah,
patients
to
say, it's free money.
Right.
It's free
That's what
money
they
to
say.
the companies.
Yeah.
Because they just keep sucking at it.
Do you know what an online
Non-bank.
host is?
Online one.
Online gambling host? When you start spending a little bit of money, they assign somebody to you
Oh my God.
to send you, they monitor, they use AI to monitor what types of bets you like. So they'll send you, here's a bonus, and then the build into the business model. We don't really talk about that much, but we should have what they call tiers. The more you bet, the more bonuses you get.
Mhm.
The more you use. Some of my patients draw an analogy to the neighborhood dope dealer who you're a little down this week. Here's a little more for you, just to make sure you come back. You're back with a little bit.
The thing that I get a little bit concerned about is the public persona, like of the Manning family. Encouraging DraftKings.
Yes. And then you have
Mark-
movie stars,
Yeah.
you know, Kevin
Mark's
Hart.
gonna talk about
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That bothers me.
And I know them, so they're nice people, but I, you know,
It bothers me.
yeah.
Mark's gonna talk a lot about that. It's all part of what we call, I thought you were, it's the normalization of the product.
Right.
Yes.
This is full stop an addictive product.
Yeah.
It is the only addictive product we normalize. That's why we call it the gambling establishment. It is the norm. What you're describing, Brian, is all part of normalization, and we should all be able to do it. Sure, you're gonna talk about it. I saw your slides.
Well, and one thing I forgot to mention, which, you know, really piqued the congressman's interest in this issue as well, that's relevant to all, was the knowledge that there were colleges and universities entering directly into partnerships with sportsbooks, where they were sharing, you know, students' emails and contact information, and then the sportsbooks then were sending promotions. These promotions that we talked about, risk-free, no sweat, bonus or odds boosts, you know, promotions directly to students, many of which were not even of legal age to be gambling,
Oh, my God.
Including student athletes.
including student athletes. And there was one,
They
you know,
pulled that back.
they pulled it back
They did.
because there was rightfully so outrage.
But the American Gaming Association, their lobbying group issued an update to their rules and regulations discouraging
Yeah.
individual partnerships with universities. That's now why you see the conferences being involved.
However, there are three maybe major sports books that don't belong to the AGA who have maintained, I think there's at least one remaining partnership between a college or university and a sports book. So particularly egregious, again, that's, you know, another piece of this that really piqued the congressman's interest. But I'll talk about the last piece, which Harry alluded to, is the micro betting piece and the use of artificial intelligence. There are companies that are dedicated solely to providing AI products for sports books to maximize the number of bets that a person can make in a game. So through the Safe Bet Act, the legislation intends to prohibit the use of AI to track individual players' gambling habits, to prohibit the use of AI to create individual offers and promotions to customers. So like we said, the ads that you see on social media or hear in podcasts or see on TV are obviously a problem, but then there's the issue with in-app promotion. So they're using AI to follow you know, whoever's using the product and then create these individualized promotions. You know, oh, you like to bet on the Yankees, you know, there's a game tonight. Here's a specific promotion for the individual.
If time permits, after
Yeah.
Mark, we may try and put it up on the board and actually
Yeah.
show you what that looks like
Right.
at two o'clock in the afternoon or a Friday afternoon.
Right.
We should be able to do that.
Yeah.
You're the tech whiz, don't look at me like that.
No, I'm thinking about time.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. So I'll wrap up.
Yes. You had
I
a,
was just gonna ask, when it comes to micro, like the idea of micro betting, I think this might get at a lot of it, but if I remember, DC has a little bit of a unique sports law in that you can bet on sports, but only if you're within 2 blocks of a stadium.
They're about to change it.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, I mean, that encourages, like, that seems like the worst place to be able to bet on sports, because you're kind of stuck and the endorphins might be running. Is that a kind of addressed through some of the like prohibition on advertising, or?
We could end up going down a real deep rabbit hole because in the NFL collective bargaining agreement with the players, there is a revenue sharing between the gambling companies, teams, and the players for game day betting within a geographic perimeter around the stadium. So there's actually incentive on the teams to further encourage people to be betting inside the stadium or near the stadium. And all of that kind of betting is AI generated. That's what, if we get a chance, I'll show you. If not, I'll show you on my film before I run out. It's all AI generated gambling. These things are happening too quickly. There's not somebody sitting in a
Yeah,
smoky room figuring out the odds on the next running play. It's all AI generated.
So in an effort to address the micro betting as a whole, we would also include a prohibition on the use of AI to create gambling products such as micro bets. And a couple pieces that are very particular to you We include, generally prohibit betting on amateur sports, some exceptions for Olympics, Paralympics, and college sports. And then the key one that I think, the NCAA is very interested, that the college level players associations are interested in, and which I assume some of you have heard about and may, have seen your own students experiencing, to prohibit all proposition bets featuring college and amateur athletes. Prop bets are gambles on an individual. Maybe Harry can do a better job of explaining it. But instead of betting on the entirety of the game, it would be on an individual's performance in a game. So we've been hearing stories about college athletes who maybe don't perform in a certain way as someone who bet on them was expecting them to, and then they are bombarded with death threats,
Yes.
harassment.
Yes.
I've heard stories of a particular student who would avoid going to his classes for 2 weeks after a game because his own classmates would harass him. He would be bombarded with Venmo requests for people who lost money based on his performance. And then, they are forced to seek mental health treatment because of this harassment. So that in particular, we know, we've been having lots of conversations with NCAA and some players associations, and that is a key piece for them that I really wanted to highlight. And Harry had mentioned, that data on the rates of gambling addiction disorder throughout the country is not funded at the federal level whatsoever. So the bill would authorize a sports betting survey through the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to examine the use rates and outcomes of sports betting nationwide. It would create a national clearinghouse for people to self-exclude from being able to use these gambling apps. Currently, there's a patchwork of self-exclusion options for people. So if you're self-excluded in Pennsylvania, you could drive across the border to Delaware and continue betting there. This would help, create a more comprehensive approach to that. And then a Surgeon General's report on the public health impacts of sports betting. So this is just a legislative framework. We are engaging stakeholders at every level to put together legislative text and hope to have that out over the next couple of months. But working very closely with Harry and Mark to get that done.
Just very quickly, you didn't brag about your boss enough. Congressman Tonto, when we first got involved in this, accepted an invitation to come meet some of my patients. I figured he'd spend 10, 15 minutes. He spent over 3 hours listening, talking, asking questions, and I think it really impacted his.
Yes.
So he's a real deal. Regardless whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, something else, Congressman Tonto is doing this in the right way for the right reasons.
And this will be a national legislative agenda. Right.
Yeah,
Good.
because, our students are probably being pressured.
Oh.
I'm sure social media is just horrible.
Yeah.
They
There's
asked him
a
about the
legal apps out
injuries.
there too, though.
Sorry?
There's illegal apps out there too.
That's the industry's argument. Mark's gonna kill me if I give you more than a 10-second answer on this. Micro betting can't be done by illegal offshore sports books. Micro betting is dependent upon a contractual relationship with the leagues and the teams for the data.
Thank you. That is very helpful.
And no one is talking about that. That you will hear us at the Public Health Advocacy Institute talking more and more about that. That's one of Dick Daynard's top issues. Anywhere I go, we talk about the reality. If you regulate us, people will just go, there's always going to be gambling. This is not about banning gambling. This has created an inherently unsafe product. That's what we're.
The sanctioned companies, the ones that are allowed to do this, are the ones that are creating the most dangerous products.
That's right.
So your definition of a micro bet is a prop bet?
No, beyond that, a prop bet is
Trying to get my definition.
prop bet is gambling on an individual athlete's performance in some way. It could be through the entire game. So that would not necessarily be a micro bet. A micro bet are bets on all the things that happen within the sporting event itself. Easiest way to understand a micro bet, tennis. They take bets on every single serve in every single tennis match. Every single serve. That's done micro betting wise. In fact,
You can do that, just, it's basically almost the same thing as like playing the slots. You just press the button, press the
In
button
fact,
every
here-
serve and place a bet.
I don't have the gambling account. I just opened the app. But there you are right now.
So you can bet on whether there'll be
on
a streaker
every
that
single
runs through the
serve.
Super Bowl or how many.
I think in Canada you can do that. I don't think
That's
they
a
actually
prop
have that
bet.
bet.
That's not a
You know
micro
what?
bet.
Mark will say, save 2 minutes at the end. That's what blew the 60 Minutes guy away when we showed him.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
When we did a 60 Minutes story and I showed the correspondent betting on every serve in a tennis match. It just,
Well, pass me the laptop.
I'll do that.
I will
Thanks.
move on and move
So
through
the
this.
next play in football gonna be a run or a pass?
Correct.
Who's it gonna
Yes.
go to? Will it be a sack?
Every-
every single,
Constant engagement.
Who's gonna score the first
On that.
basket? All of those.
we'll show,
But the next one.
Yeah, the next one.
we'll save 2-3 minutes at the end. I'll show you on the board what micro betting is.
Coin
I
flip.
was like, I bet-
There we
Yeah,
I bet,
we'll show you.
LeBron James.
And it's the most addictive part of it.
All right, I'm gonna breeze through these last slides because we actually are going a little over time.
That's okay.
It's
Oh,
fine.
Good, good. Good to-
Are we a hard stop at 2:30?
It's important.
We're not a hard stop at 2:30.
He's probably already joined, so just keep.
So,
going.
you know this guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he used to be our governor.
Oh, yeah, that's.
Before that, he ran Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts.
Oh, he's had a successful
Pretty good guy,
career.
pretty good guy. So, he announced just a few weeks ago that, to protect college athletes, he wants to eliminate this proposition betting, this prop betting on college sports. And, as Darren had just alluded to, there's been many reports of college athletes being harassed, bullied by gamblers, including some of their own peers, who, may have lost a prop bet on that player's performance. And so, he says, the NCAA, they just released this, right? The NCAA is drawing a line on sports betting to protect student athletes and to protect the integrity of the game. Issues across the country these last several days show there is more work to be done. And we see that increasing all the time. This is because the industry the gambling establishment has targeted this particularly vulnerable group. And this is the ad that started really the kerfuffle that resulted in the American Gaming Association backing off from partnerships with universities. And this is the one that went out to students, everyone in the university community.
But we can call if we have a problem. So
Yes, right. Once you have a problem, once you've got a problem. Right, and I'll just say that, we see more and more news coverage every week of problems that are arising. Like this week, right? We had a Toronto Raptors player, right? John Tate Porter, banned for life, I believe by the NBA, because he was taking himself out of games to allow bettors to cash in on wagers, on prop bets. He changed his performance on the court for gambling interests. And, does this occur in college athletics? Maybe. Porter was banned from the NBA. We had, weird betting patterns around a couple of the Temple Owls games last month. This just may be the tip of the iceberg. It's like, where did we pick up data anomalies? Where did they get reported? But of course, student athletes are prohibited from betting on games, even on practice. And in a world though where sports betting is everywhere, on TV, on social media, on billboards, in the dorms, do we expect that policy will provide enough protection for college athletes? I don't think so. I do a lot of work in tobacco policy as well as tobacco litigation. And, in our cases, we look back in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, when it was, it was illegal then, of course, to sell cigarettes to minors. But smoking rates for, for people between 16 and 17 years old were often above 50% for those that age bracket. None of them were legally sold their tobacco products. One of the reasons that smoking was considered, one of the reasons for this is smoking was not just considered acceptable, but it was like the norm. It was the norm for a well-adjusted young person in the 1960s and the 1970s. That's why I have more than half of those kids smoking. It was regularly advertised on primetime TV until 1971. In all major magazines, on more billboards than any other product. And the age restriction was kind of irrelevant because 95% of smokers began smoking regularly before they were 18 years old. And I see some real similarities here. We have so much marketing directed not just at the fans, but I think impliedly marketing to the college community, to students as well as student athletes who are so engaged already in sports. I think they are especially vulnerable to this type of thing. A 200% sign-up bonus. Bet now, just as from just what, last week, 2 weeks ago, yeah. It's a good game. You've former college stars pushing this with our good friends at DraftKings. It's everywhere. It's the norm. It's what is expected. If you're a young person and you're into sports, of course you're going to be wanting to do. Everyone's doing it, right? And that's what we have right now. And it reminds me a lot of what we saw in the how normal this all was. You don't see any more cigarette advertising billboards. Here's a giant Winston sign next to Madison Square Garden in the 1970s. And here's FanDuel on Madison Square Garden. Last year, that is still there. So there's just a tremendous amount of normalization of this product, which is why I think, the Mannings are part of that problem, but they are also probably unaware of most of what's going on there. That's not necessarily an excuse, but I think it's an explanation as to why we're seeing this, on television and our news feeds all the time.
Well, as part of that, though, the people, it's like, this is a legal activity, you're not having to go to the bookie and engage in a legal activity anymore. This is completely legal, so therefore it's got the stamp of approval.
Yeah,
Right.
it's proved by your state. It's proved by your state. So, there was this NCAA sports gambling survey with some very disturbing findings. Sports wagering pervasive among students, with 58% of 18 to 22-year-olds engaging in sports gambling. Only the 21 and 22-year-olds are doing so lawfully. But still, more than half of them, nearly 60%, are engaging in it. It's 67% of students betting on sports, because that is the obviously the activity that and the entertainment is tied up with it that is of most interest. It's all also on their device, their mobile device. I don't know if you've noticed, young people tend to use their phones quite a bit. And in fact, it's really challenging to get them off of their devices, even in the classroom.
Especially in the class.
And then here you've got another, even probably stronger addiction, right? Potentially stronger addiction right there on that same device. It is a horrible combination. I mean, maybe student athletes aren't on their phones when they're actually practicing or games, but and so 60% of students are likely to bet on sports after seeing a gambling advertisement. No one thinks that advertising makes them do anything. The advertising industry has a different opinion of that. And the massive advertising campaign by this industry, I think, is really proof that it is an effective tool for recruiting new gamblers.
Can I just plug, Mark, anybody who hasn't read that report, I would really, really encourage you to go read it. It's eye-opening. They cover things like what percentage of college students have seen an ad like in the last day or last week. And it's staggering numbers.
More than a few have. 60% of students are micro betting, in-game micro betting. That is where the money is. That is where the marketing is. Once you're in on the platform and an app and you have an account, that's what they're pushing at you. 80% indicate that betting on sports makes it more likely they'll watch the event on television or streaming. So it certainly it's a win-win for the sports leagues and perhaps for the conferences. Yeah.
And the media companies.
Yeah. 27% of NCAA compliance administrators learned of student, athlete, coaches, or staff betting on sports. That's a red flag. And 25% of compliance administrators learned of of threats related to gambling targeting student athletes. So this is a widespread problem, which is really covered up by the appearance of normalcy in the way that this is mostly handled by the media. The media is really part of the gambling establishment. So we need a global public health action. As you saw in every ad, right, it says gambling problem. So they're offering something for you if you have a problem already. There's nothing there right now to prevent the more dangerous and addictive products from being sold. And I think, policy change is going to come as we denormalize some of this.
So
Please.
we can't really recognize this in the classroom because if they're on their phones, they're on their phones, unless we say you have to put your phones down. They're not drunk, they're not staggering, they're not anything.
No, they appear to be engaged.
Right, and so this
They're
is even
into
harder
something,
to
yeah.
recognize
Right.
because, I guess they'll drain their parents' credit cards.
Hard for you to recognize, very easy for the sports books to recognize.
Yeah.
They have all of the data and they weaponize it to extract as much money from student athletes and students and everyone, particularly in that demographic, as they can. And, so much of their profit is actually derived from people who are struggling.
Can't drink $1,000 worth of vodka in one night.
Right,
You will fall asleep, you will fall
you
down.
can't do it like
You
that.
can't.
In class, you can
So-
do this.
So there are some different ways of denormalizing. And we've learned this certainly in tobacco. But you can denormalize the effects of the dangerous product on consumers. So if somebody is stealing money to gamble, that is denormalized, right? That if someone cannot stop thinking or talking or exhibiting some of these clinical indications of a gambling disorder, that is denormalized. And that is where the responsible gaming model is focused on fixing that denormalized behavior that's already denormalized. The denormalizing the effect of the product on others is another important way to do it. You don't hear as much from the gambling companies about, hey, has Junior stolen your money for gambling? Call us. No, you don't hear that one. You hear just about, do you have a gambling problem? But the effect of the addiction on other people is a type of harm that we don't even measure. I believe soon to be Dr. Levant will be doing some of his research measuring that. So we'll hopefully have some of that data. You can denormalize the products themselves. So we're calling out some of the more dangerous products. And then you can denormalize the sellers of the products. That what they're doing is not okay. The way that they're using the information, the way they're targeting, the way they're leveraging supercomputing power to extract as much profit from a known addictive product as possible. I don't think we're all in favor of that. So there are different modes for policy change. One of them is voluntary action. So voluntary action, we've got the responsible gaming model is a model that is put in place by the gambling companies, right? So we've heard a little bit about it, but it's all based around the industry doing what it can for the most visible folks who may be harmed by the product after they're harmed for the most part. There's very little prevention in the responsible gaming model. And it is a really good tool for delaying a formal regulatory response. It's not all bad. There are some good things that can happen, but I think it's essentially a shield strategically for this industry. Legislation, well, we heard a little bit about possible legislation that will be filed. Couple months. Can't wait. So we have the Safe Bet Act on the horizon as I think a reasonably comprehensive model for legislation. There's regulation, and wherever there is legal sports betting, it is regulated at the state level. There are some states that are still in the process of adopting it. I think there's a lot of room for states to revisit how they're regulating sports betting, sports gambling. We're working with individual legislators from states that have reached out to us and worked with Senator Rasmussen in Minnesota, where they're in the process. They may or may not get it done this legislative session. They're trying to legalize sports betting in Minnesota, but the committee that Teddy was on, the Commerce and Consumer Committee, actually approved a ban on in-game wagering to be maybe one of the reasons why the bill is in trouble.
Yes, it is.
But yeah, I think the more information there is about what is actually happening, about the way that the companies and the whole sports betting establishment have been working together, I think the legislators may want to, and regulators, the gaming commissions or gambling commissions in the states might want to, revisit some of those regulations, add additional rules. And then there's litigation, and the Public Health Advocacy Institute has filed so far one class action lawsuit targeting DraftKings and one of their promotions in which they're offering $1,000 sign-up bonus for new customers, which the new customers who sign up are did not realize that they actually have to immediately deposit $5,000 and then bet $25,000 in a limited period of time on only certain bets, not to get $1,000, but to get 1,000 credits for more gambling. So we felt that was a very deceptive promotion, and so we've filed a class action lawsuit in Massachusetts against DraftKings, where they are based. But there are many other ways that I think we can use the courts to try to bring more attention to what is going on, and not only that, but hopefully through discovery to get some transparency to find out, really, what are they doing with the data? How are they using it? Is this okay? And I think that was an important piece of denormalizing not just smoking, not just cigarettes, but the tobacco companies themselves and the executives who were being dishonest with the consumers as well as policymakers, which I think led to the real changes around cultural norms and tobacco use. Anyway, there's a lot on the table. Harry, you wanted to do a little demonstration.
Can you pull it up?
Yeah, of what, DraftKings?
Yeah, no DraftKings. So this is what you see if you go to the app. Once you go to the app, it says right away that $1,000 bonus you saw there. I'm gonna have Mark, should pull it up here. What I ask you to keep in mind is sort of where we started, which is the concept of the chase. So when we talk about in-game betting, in-game betting is not just every little micro event, every serve, every swing of a golf club. They're constantly changing the odds within the game. So as one team pulls ahead, they'll adjust the point spread. Why are these things done? They're done for people who are chasing more action. It's the business model and it's the thing that by definition causes harm. So Mark was describing the promotion where we'll give you 1,000 credits. The 1,000 credits are only after you have wagered $25,000 in the first 90 days. Then the credits expire in 14 days. They never turn into money. You have 14 days to use these credits. It's all designed to keep you engaged. Many people won't struggle with that. A lot of people will. And that's why when we decided to work with Congressman Tonko, we were privileged to have him ask, we decided to go up to the top here. Not, all right, here's the harm at the bottom. How do we regulate and change this product in a way that these types of things can't be designed to cause this kind of harm and problem? Mark mentioned at state level. I'm of the belief there are a lot of regulators and legislators at the state level who are very happy with this new income stream.
Yeah.
But I'm also of the belief that there are a significant number of people who don't realize what's going on. They don't know that on your phone you can bet on every serve. They don't know that at 2:30 in the afternoon you can bet on darts, or you can bet on table tennis from darts. They only have. That's right. You're not likely at 2:30 in the afternoon to bet on. You know who is? Somebody who wants more action. These products are not designed for recreational use. I suggest to you, I'm not betting on a lot of things. Trust me, I did. There were very few things I wouldn't bet on. If you'd have given me access to darts, I probably would have bet on it because these products are designed for that. Now, I don't think most legislators know that there's gambling going on college baseball.
So the
You'll see it in a second.
NCAA is against the general betting, but what about the micro betting? Do they even realize?
I don't even think they're against the general.
Well, no, the NCAA, not
That's
charter, the like Constitution. How can I forget the word Constitution here in DC? The NCAA Constitution is opposed to gambling, but they take no position on what their universities and conferences do. So Mark talked about Governor Baker. I want to believe that when he talks about prop bets, his heart and mind's in the right place, but it's going to be very ineffective. For example, during the basketball tournaments, the men's and women's tournaments, what the gambling companies did, they changed it. Will North Carolina's next basket be a 2-pointer or a 3-pointer? That's how they got around the individual problem. So you're looking at DraftKings homepage right now. You're actually
Before we get
looking.
too far away from it though, when you talk about if you own a bar and someone's falling down drunk and you serve them a drink, you're in trouble.
There you go.
That's right.
So Mark brought up the litigation. They're nowhere in the country, and I will speak very brief and turn it to Mark, because I am a former lawyer. Nothing I say is a legal opinion. Former, but we don't have a single state that has codified a duty of care. However, we at PHAI,
Well,
what do you want to say about it?
I know, I think it's just, it's a very good analogy. And it's one where there is a big gap in law, liability and negligence. You wouldn't permit and you don't permit and you hold liable a alcohol server who is continually serving someone who is visibly intoxicated. In the case of the sports books, they have all the data and they can see the red flags when somebody is struggling.
And
And
deliberately serving.
they're targeting them for more.
And the products are designed that way. So as a former lawyer, as my second disclaimer, but now the policy advisor to the Public Health Advocacy Institute, and I'm seeing it as a treating clinician, we are certainly having discussions about how we bring that approach. Because the first thing critics will say to me is bring my past up against me, and that's totally fine. Let's have a conversation. The second thing they will do is say, what about alcohol? And I know I own the room when they say that. because we do regulate alcohol. We have dram shop laws. Liquor license holders, if they serve someone visibly intoxicated, can lose their license, and there's civil liabilities, right? None of that exists in this era. We'll see what, let me just say, watch this space. We at PHAI don't sit on our hands.
Cassandra,
Keep going on the alcohol analogy, right? In order to serve it, you have to have food or the different licenses for beer and wine. Are there any type of nuances like that?
We just allowed, let's take a peek.
Yeah.
That's where that's where the affordability checks come in, right? That the affordability checks are designed. And Congressman Tonko's team, I cannot tell you how many hours we've met with them, and they've
They
taken
put up
such
with
a.
us all those hours.
Darian hangs up on me sometimes, but it's always graciously. The affordability checks are designed to address that issue, to change the onus from, you should have been more responsible, to wait a minute. State has given these companies a license. They can't do anything but make money. Gambling makes money. It's the math of the math. If we're gonna give you this license, maybe we need to hold you responsible before you start. That's the public health approach. That's the check. And it's built around the very first conversation. What are we doing, Sharon? 4 years now? I walked into your office 4 years ago with this crazy idea.
It's like one more year every couple of weeks, but yeah, it's like 3 or 4 years.
3 or
something
4
like that.
years.
so what can faculty do? What would you like to go home, us to go home thinking,
Let me
I
show
can
you.
do this?
I'll show you and we'll answer your question. You're looking right now at tennis from Barcelona. Tennis. And you can see that in this. Look here. Point winner. This is every single point in every single tennis match. Oh, because I'm talking to, and wait a minute, let me see if I have college baseball. You sure I do? There's college baseball. None of the games have started, so you can't see.
Just in Cincinnati.
And during the course of,
Houston.
Houston versus Cincinnati.
if a game was being played right now, you would see as things change in the game. I'm sorry, I don't know the gentleman's first name. I don't have.
Dan.
And you asked about micro betting. Once this game starts, so right now, before the game, Cincinnati is favored by 1.5 runs over Houston. As the game develops, as players get on base, they will consistently change the money line and the run line. So that if you think you're falling behind on your bet, you can, or if you think you're winning, you can, it's nonstop. So even with the ban on player prop, this is where micro betting comes in, and this is where the work Congressman Tonko's leadership is so important, because until you get around and do something with live in-game betting, you look right now it's what, 2:30 in the afternoon? There are 74 live in-game betting opportunities right now on baseball, tennis, golf, soccer, basketball, table tennis, handball, and darts. So what would I say to you, trying to go back, is to recognize there's a gaping hole here. That regardless of what the NCAA says it's doing, the gambling companies are now working with the universities and the conferences, and it's about to explode. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to lead the way. Everyone else is going to come along. And there's too much money at stake for the college and universities not to do it. But once they do, you open the Pandora's box, you're going to have a lot of trouble with it.
I just want to say that at LSU, the faculty senate pressured the athletic department to drop their arrangement with the people that were brought up earlier. I can't think of the name. Caesars. And so they listened to us. And so, they're going to prevent the issue of how they advertised. And I think they're going to reconsider, when the contract's done, what they're going to do next.
So you're gonna have these slides, you can have access to these slides. I think the most important thing is for you to be knowledgeable about this going back to your schools. I mean, you're not gonna necessarily be able to change universities' policy when it's, so much money is
Sure we can.
there.
Yeah.
But maybe you can have an
We need
have
to
an
be
effect, but
proactive.
if you can do it from knowing what's going on, because almost nobody knows this stuff right now. Almost nobody knows
It's
it.
awareness.
Hearings, go back and before you look at these arrangements, ask your conference, have a hearing, call us to come and disseminate this information. When 60 Minutes came to me and said, hey, you want to help us with a gambling story? And I said, well, only to do from a public health perspective. And they asked me, well, who else is doing public health in the country? And I said, well, I want you to meet my partners and friends, Dick Danner and Mark Gottlieb, just the three of us. They didn't believe me. They came back a month later and said, you know what? You were telling us the truth, and that's why we want to do the story. Let us come help you. Because when people see this and understand it,
And we don't want to be the only ones doing it.
No, we want-
Yeah, Carrie, go ahead.
You said you got a 60 Minutes interview.
We were on 60 Minutes February 4th.
Yeah.
Is that on YouTube or something?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I think that's a way of showing people.
Yes.
I will, I may have sent you the link to it, but if I didn't, I will send you the 60 Minutes story, the CNN story, and I want to share my own Northeast
Yeah, I
United
wanna see
profile. I will send you those three things
Thank
today.
you.
And you, is it Darian? You said something that I think should be paid a little bit more attention to. Our athletes are vulnerable. They're not like NBA or NFL stars where you have your security or whatever you're protected.
Manager.
No, not at all.
Or Otani.
Yes, so if you get attacked in class or whatever because of this gambling issue, like it can go to that level. And then all of a sudden it's a big issue that we should have saw this coming. But I don't think people realize, I mean, hearing you all say this, I realize how serious it is. Always question like, what if somebody attacked one of these athletes that's just casually walking around campus?
It's going to happen.
It's gonna happen sooner or
It's going to
later,
happen.
sooner or later. So I think, this is very scary to me.
Go back to very quickly to Kelly's question, what else can you do? I struggle with something. I was trying to decide whether I wanted to be critical of the NCAA, and I decided I want to in this way. The NCAA has entered into a very lucrative contract with a company from the UK called Epic Risk Management. Epic Risk Management is almost fully funded by the gambling industry and other partners. And they go around now, colleges and universities, and they educate student athletes. Basically, they have people with lived experience tell their stories. Don't let this happen to you, right? It's tremendous cover for the NCAA. It looks good on paper, but you know what? I am positive when Nancy Reagan became first lady in 1981 that she meant well with just say no.
Yeah.
But we know it's an abject failure. If you tell student athletes, well, don't let this happen to you. When does that work with beer? It's great cover for the NCAA. And what it does is prevents people like us from coming in and saying, hey, wait a minute. There's a bigger public health story we need to talk about. I keep cutting you off. I apologize.
It's okay. So legally, can we locally require students or offer students a chance to have affordability checks?
They don't exist anywhere in the country. UK has just rules, the affordability checks, the one non-negotiable. And we go back and forth a lot on this, but my one non-negotiable, I'm gonna fight like heck for affordability check to stay in this bill. Because if you said to me, Harry, tell me one thing that could begin preventing harm right now before I even get to microbetting, create affordability checks. Because what I see over and
Such
over with
common
patients, they deposit 1,000, then another 1,000, then another 1,000. If we just had the onus on the industry to make sure the person has the financial wherewithal, give me one thing, that's the first one.
Is there some way the university can set up?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. It's
don't think we
between,
will.
it's between the sports book and the consumer.
And the state.
And the state is the
state would have to
oversight,
do it.
as the oversight.
You maxed out your credit card. Sports betting. Is that it, or do they have other ways to get to your credit?
What will a person,
Which credit card?
See.
Oh, okay.
How about the Federal Trade Commission? Do they have a role in this at all?
They haven't.
Consumer
Yeah,
protection.
I mean, for deceptive advertising, they conceivably could, but I've heard nothing that suggests that they're taking a hard look at
We
it.
have an accredited investor requirement for investing. the FCC. I mean, as far as you have to have an enforcement mechanism, whatever legislation. And I'm not sure about the Justice Department doing this, but
Right, there's nothing to enforce at the federal.
I know, but when there is, but I think when I was looking at your legislation, you're using the Justice Department as the enforcement mechanism, where maybe it's the Federal Trade Commission that.
We were, before we met Darian and Congressman Tonko, about a year and a half ago, we were playing around with FCC,
Okay.
SEC, Federal Trade Commission. When the opportunity came along to work with a congressman to introduce federal legislation that would cover all of this, it doesn't mean we don't do those things as well.
I'm just talking out loud.
I think this will get, the hope of this bill and the precedent things we'll do around it is to force people to talk about it. I get to meet a person. When I show them betting on tennis matches, but you don't know the names of the players at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I get to meet one person and say, oh, that's okay. Not one. Not one. So it's the
Yeah,
opportunity.
what's the big deal, Harry?
It's the opportunity. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. If you're betting on every serve in a tennis match, you meet the diagnostic criteria for a gambling disorder. Just do. So we have to move the focus from the harm to preventing the harm by looking at the nature of the products. That's where Congressman Tonko comes in. You could tell the story of after we started doing this, how many calls you got from gambling industry people coming in behind us saying, you don't need the federal government. You don't need that's one after another. So federal legislation and affordability checks are the third rail to the industry. They're gonna fight these things. And it's why ultimately
Making tons of.
standard of care has to, duty of care has to.
I think it goes back to what Kelly was saying too, of the fact of, I mean, you got access to these things at any time. And the scariness of it is that people are bored at 2:30. You know, so they may just be like, look, let me just go online and start. And then you can create an addiction just because of the fact that you're already addicted to these phones. Yeah, exactly.
Heaven forbid.
Real quick though, you mentioned it earlier, but we talked about the debate yesterday, and I think this is very, very important in this discussion because it applies to our particular population we work with. Your brain is not fully developed until you're 25, and one of the things that develops last is your understanding and comprehension of consequences.
Right.
Risk reward is.
And so, our population is particularly vulnerable
Yes.
to this because of human development, and I don't think that gets talked about enough.
I agree.
And here's where it begins. And we trailed off when I said to Mark, I think it was 4 years ago. We just met a few years ago. But the very first thing when I went in to pitch this idea to Professors Danard and Gottlieb was, listen, we're talking about an addictive product. Once we realize it's an addictive product, all kinds of other things flow from there. And the next one that flows for your population is addictive product, people under the age of 26, risk reward system of the brain isn't fully functional. Therefore, there's a duty for colleges, universities, conferences, administrators to find a way to regulate this because they're not going to regulate themselves. This is their new, it's a new profit margin. You put those puzzle pieces together, it's the single biggest argument and single best argument for reform at any level for those 4 reasons. No
So-
question about it.
So do you guys have a short, or are you developing a short kind of pulse talk that students of this age Zoomers would hear and go, oh my gosh.
Maybe we.
Great idea.
Yeah,
It's not being.
I mean,
It's on our
it's
list.
gotta be quick.
Yeah.
Like
Taylor Swift to do it.
Yeah, so, okay, well, so I want to thank you guys. This was very enlightening.
We'll send the PDF of the
Yeah,
slides.
send it all to me.
Yeah,
This
thank
was for us terrifyingly enlightening. And we're going to our health and safety next talk and I'm feeling battered already.
I just want to thank you for reaching out to me.
You're
And
gonna go to
Did
Belmont.
you guys park downstairs or anywhere?
Yeah.
I have plans to hopefully.
I have a quick question for,
Thanks so
um,
much, Cassandra.
Representative Tonko's aide.
Oh, question for you.
I'm sorry.
Is there a
Did
question
you
for you?
guys, yeah, did you guys park downstairs?
No.
Hi, John.
I'm going back.
Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't get what your name was.
It's Darian Harback.
Oh, Darian, okay. One thing I just wanted to bring up for Representative Tonka was the issue of kratom. I don't know if you've heard of kratom. It's KRATOM.
Right,
Kratom, yeah. It's an addictive substance and we have not yet banned it in the United States. So if he could take that up, that would be really wonderful.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring it up because I actually very recently ran into a former New York State senator who is now lobbying for a bill to regulate kratom. And so it has been recently put on our radar. So I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, it's very critical because, you know, had an issue with a family member who was, you know, got into that, you know, as a substitute for something else. And it's an issue.
No, and I
Usually for, you know, an opioid product, it's used to help with the withdrawal symptoms, but the way it's sold and completely unregulated, you don't even know what you're getting.
It's like fentanyl in that regard.
And it is addictive.
Right, because it's an opioid agonist.
Would you like a drink for the?
No, good, thank
You
you.
don't need.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're trying to just like build a coalition right now to educate the congressman's colleagues. Senator Blumenthal is the only other, really the only senator, but we don't have the other big voice on this issue.
Senator, right?
Senator, yeah.
Well, that's a good start.
He has a different bill, that would take 50% of the excise tax on sports books and put it toward gambling addiction treatment. But again, we feel that we need to do the preventative piece, you know, not just the reaction.
That's where we need to go. Would you like a drink?
That's true. Given what we've seen about congressional hearings on social media, I wonder what I'd be like.